Hello. Hi. Welcome, everyone, to the Immigration Clinic for Creative Professionals, hosted by Verdensrommet. We're very happy that you could all be here in person and all of you joining us online who are either not in Oslo because we are a network that's across Norway, and those of you who are still in Oslo but haven't gotten used to COVID, post-COVID times. My name is Prerna Bishnoi. I'm an artist. I live in Trondheim. I'm originally from India. I came here to do my master's in fine art at the Trondheim Academy of Fine Art. And I've been lucky, actually, to stay on after that with lots of struggles, as we will speak a lot about today. Either having had the opportunity to have a job in a cultural institution through aspirantordningen, a scheme by the Art Council that allows you to get a job, or just freelancing for art institutions, whether it's Levanger Kommune or Kunsthall Trondheim, or just working at the Art Academy itself. So I've been very lucky to have that. So, yeah, I'll introduce yourself.
So I'm Sarah. I'm originally from Karachi, Pakistan, and I came to Oslo in 2017 for my master's at KIO. And of course, I've also been pretty lucky with staying here and getting work. It's fantastic that Norway became a place to kind of get your dreams when it comes to amazing grant opportunities, which you do not have in other countries. But that's also the limbo that we will talk about, that you get grants, but you can't travel, or you get grants, but you, it's a struggle with all of this in some ways. I've lived here for almost 5 years now, and I've been working for Verdensrommet since last year. And this was a project that we were thinking about after a similar project happened in New York by the Art Law Center in New York. And we were inspired by Immigration Clinic program over there. So we decided that, okay, let's try to do something here as well. And we're hoping that this continues every year and that it travels to different parts of Norway. It's not restricted to Oslo. So I'll just briefly touch upon who is Verdensrommet. We're a mutual support network for non-EU creative professionals, where we have been going through and understanding together the bureaucratic immigration process and not realizing that it's insane amount of knowledge and research that we've been doing individually and sort of bringing together in this platform. And then Prerna can kind of say a little bit about why VR or Verdensrommet was formed. I mean, it's a really big word, Verdensrommet, so we say VR, which is also we are.
It's also virtual
pun,
reality, but very much our reality. It's just to say that Verdensrommet was initiated in 2020 with the pandemic by Gabriel Paré, an artist from Oslo, and Rodrigo Gardas Perez, also in Oslo. It kind of started at a time when with the pandemic, people losing, as everyone knows, that the cultural sector was very badly hit. People were losing clients, they were losing, gigs. And at this time, it suddenly felt even more than usual, the pressures that we have to undergo as artists who live here on a year-to-year visa. So if people don't know, those artists who come here, most of us came here to study. So we came here to do our masters, and then after our masters, we wanted to kind of stay on. But this process of staying on is a year-to-year endeavor. So we apply every year for a visa, and we are accepted or rejected. based on whether we meet these conditions. We apply for different types of visa. When we arrive, we apply for student. When we graduate, we apply for job seeker. If we are lucky, we apply for a skilled worker visa with an employer in Norway, an employed visa, which is very rare. Because in the field of arts, like in my own case, like very often my boss had a 60% position and I had a 100% position. Almost unheard of in the arts to have a 100% position. And you are required or mandated to have an 80% job in order to have an employment visa. Or some of us, over the last few years, have been started off by one of our friends who said, okay, you know, I think a self-employed visa really works for our condition. And so we tried to see, you know, how do we fit into that? It's been a hustle, you know, we kind of just are constantly trying to match our working conditions to the immigration regulations. And that is kind of what the immigration clinic is about. It is kind of what Verdensrommet has been doing. We've just come together. It started off as a Facebook grant and then a Facebook private group where all our, you know, our knowledge of the immigration process suddenly felt like we're not alone in it and that we can't do immigration as a lonely experience. It has to be shared, and we were kind of exchanging strategies, we were exchanging experiences, what are the processes that we've gone through. And
it's like everyone was coming with unique conditions. Like,
yeah,
I got an artist assistant grant, but I also got this other grant, or I also got this job. How do what sort of visa do I get? So every creative professional or artist came with their unique conditions, which we did not really know answers to, but we were just trying to figure out what the answers are.
yeah.
And that's why I think it became the sea of knowledge right there, which we have compiled on our website, which is FAQ, the frequently asked questions, which will also be presented to the UDI today, who will hopefully answer some of them. Because we all know it's quite a hassle to call UDI, to call 3 different people at UDI to get not probably the same answer, and the answers are always different. So that's also a little bit of a challenge that we will try to address here. So, I mean, we're hosting Immigration Clinic, of course, for all the reasons that we have spoken right now. But I would just share my own experience of where my visa was rejected last year. And we were all working everything online, so we were kind of blinded by the screen. And these are very little things that when you're uploading documents online and you're a human, you make an error and you forget to upload a document. So instead of a red light blinking on the website trying to tell you like, hey, you can't proceed further because you have missed a very important document. No, it just kept going, and I submitted my application, landed with a rejection letter telling me to leave in 10 days, which of course freaked me out because you felt displaced in a minute and your whole life has been in Norway for a while. So I think Verdensrommet became a point where it also really helped me to go through that process where I kind of shared that situation. And I would also like to thank CREO here. So if you're a member of CREO, you can get legal help, at least a phone call. I mean, we all know how much legal help costs. So 30 minutes are pretty valuable to even kind of get some help on your case. And I think it's important for us to also know our rights. And I think that is why it became sort of easier for me to appeal my case. And obviously it worked out because it was a very stupid problem. But to go through that process, it's really hard because I mean, your mind is elsewhere, and as a creative, you're trying to balance both of these situations to work. So I think Verdensrommet also became a place to kind of share all of this together, take risks together. And the reason that we're also hosting Immigration Clinic is so that we can avoid these risks and have a more more good knowledge about our rights to keep fighting for it. And also of course, one of the most important things is to, we're experiencing these gaps and we want to identify the gaps between immigration regulation and the working conditions in the creative sector.
Yeah, a good example of that is so one of the things that we will, a lot of this might seem quite out there, but the way in which today is structured is hopefully you get an idea of what the immigration regulations look like, which form the framework under which we kind of have a livelihood here. And the creative sector itself has a very particular way of working. And all the union representatives, whether it's from NBK or Creo or Norsk Danskunstnere, will all speak to that. And for example, just to say that most artists are employed and self-employed, which is a contradiction for visa application. So this is just one small example, and we will go through what are these conditions of working in the creative sector, which is often defined by being a self-employed, and what are the categories and what are the characteristics of that type of self-employment. So in one sense, we're trying to figure out, we kind of live, like Sarah said, we live these gaps between the immigration regulation and the working conditions. But it was we wanted to take the opportunity to get legal professionals, to get union representatives, to get people in politics, to see our experience from their perspective, and to frame it from a very conscious perspective that policymakers, lawmakers can also understand, and hopefully we can try and draft a proposal to change this, because at the end, we all feel like, we want to stay here and contribute to the Norwegian cultural landscape. Norway really provides us a great opportunity to not only be a market-based artist. We don't have to only be, gallery-based artists. We can be people interested in knowledge production and research. We can be people who are interested in artistic entrepreneurship, or we can be artists of different kinds. And we recognize, for example, it's unheard of for people coming from India that the government takes so much care to say that art is such an important part of a green shift or a cultural policy shift. This is unheard of. You feel like you're seen. And we want to be part of changes, and we want to change things for ourselves as well.
I think I'll just quickly add one thing here, that though we are calling that this immigration clinic is for creative professionals from a non-EU background, but something that we did come across during the pandemic was that all creative professionals, all artists were in absolute precarious situations where our Norwegian artist friends were also not able to work at a bar, not able to work at a cafe, and then how do you really support your economy? So I think in the long run, the project will have, I think the project will also be reaching these places where I think it will be helping to sustain all our livelihoods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll keep quiet now and let people who are professionals continue. And we just wanted to say small things about the hospitality, and of course, instructions for people online. There's, for people here, there's coffee and there's water. There's a program on the table. There's a manifesto. For the English speakers, there's a transcript of the video that we're going to play after lunch. The toilets are on this floor. You just have to, walk out, and there's signage. And for those online, unfortunately, your voices will not be heard, but if you have any questions, comments, just type it. Bianca, who is here, she will read it out. So any questions at all, please ask. Yeah. Maybe you want to talk about the structure of the,
The structure of the day?
Yeah.
Yeah, what is the structure of the day? Okay. No, I can do it.
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's here. Yes. So first and most foremostly, the seminar is supported by KURO, Office for Public Art, Ekpos Legat, and Norskdans Kunstnere. The the panelists, or I would say rather say that we have two co-chairs for our discussion today, and they're sitting right on this big table. We have Kjetil Larsen, Professor of Law, University of Oslo, and we have Diego Preno, Associate Professor of Public Law, Oslo Met. During the seminar, we also have two note takers, Nora Milch and Oystein Flo Based. Okay, yes. We will begin. The first lecture we're going to have, or presentation, is by Vidar Hegge. He is a senior advisor and department coordinator for skilled worker visa permit at UDI. He will first present, of course, his presentation, and then we will slowly move into a 30-minute Q&A with him. So if anyone has any questions, this is your chance to ask him. I think anyone can ask him questions. So even like if any union or if any member has a question to ask them, which they think can benefit the talk later, please go for it. And after that, we will have Ruben Steinem, currently chair of board for NBK, Norsk Billedkunstnere, and soon will be the director of OCA. He will do a presentation on mixed economies and patchwork economies of creative professionals, and it will be followed with a 15-minute chair response. And like maybe
5 minutes and then Q&A.
Yeah, and I think let's touch on the program after that, because I think people will not be able to follow with the whole.
Yeah, then we break for lunch, basically.
Yes, we break for lunch, and then we eat.
Yeah.
And then we will.
So if you can just maybe, I know that there are people online who are also from, part of our network who have really contributed to building this and to building the resource that's on our website, etc. So if you have questions, please just type it in. There are people who are from educational institutions as well. So questions related to immigration and education, this is a great opportunity to type that in as well. So we just wait 2 minutes to kind of change things, and
and we're just waiting for the guest to come now.
Okay. So so please be patient with us. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
you can just go. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We will begin today's program with a presentation by Vidar Hegge. He's a senior advisor and department coordinator for skilled worker visa permits at the Norwegian Directorate of Immigration. We asked him to focus his presentation specifically on self-employed permits, something that we all face. We all want to kind of apply for and maybe suit our working conditions. The presentation will be followed by maybe now a little bit shorter Q&A, maybe 20-minute Q&A. All the people online, please feel free to write in your questions in the chat. And all the people in the room, you can raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you during the Q&A. Thank you, Vidar, and we're very happy that you could make it for the presentation.
Take a technical test, sorry. First, can you all hear me clearly? Perfect. So, many thanks for the invitation to come here. I think it's great to meet you here today. I mentioned that... Sorry. When I met you in February, I mentioned that I think this is a win-win situation. It's great for us to come here and to inform. This is better probably. To inform about what are the rules, what you need to hand in, what our experience is. But it's also great for us to meet here and to learn more about your situation. So I think it's great to be here. It's an honor. Thank you. In other ways, you are important to us. I think that is important to underline. And I'll come back to the self-employed permits, roughly how many there are. But the focus today is clearly what's stated here on the startup slide. It's a residence permit for self-employed persons. And I think I didn't know in advance how many you were, how formal. I thought maybe it's a bit informal. So I think that it's up to the chairs and you, of course, how you want to do this. But if you have any questions while I speak, you are more than welcome to ask. But I know also we will have a good timing afterwards for Q&A. But this is obviously also up to the chairpersons here, I understand. So I know my role, but for me, an informal way of doing it is great. So to start with, I would just state kind of what is maybe self-evident, but you need a residence permit to work in Norway. And this is from day one. So you need a residence permit to do any work in Norway from day one. And my focus today is persons outside the European Union, the European Economic Area, EU, EEA, or third country citizens, to have that clearly outlined as well. And there are different kinds of permits, and I'll mention a few other ones also here today. I will also note initially that, to start with, that there are a few exceptions to the requirements of a residence permit to work in Norway. But most of them are 90 days or less, so not so relevant probably here. But we come back to that in the Q&A if there's any questions about that. So our focus is clear today. That is residence permit for self-employed persons. The three other ones I put on the slide here are there's no doubt they are the most numerous counted in applications and decision each year. So kind of the skilled worker permit, if you have an employer, for instance a limited company, an aksjeselskap, then that might be a good idea for you. And it might be relevant for some of you maybe. So I'll mention some points about that permit at the end of my presentation. So we have this seconded employees as well. That is if you're employed abroad and you're going on assignment to Norway, then as a service provider. That's also quite a numerous one. And for both these ones, you need to be a skilled worker, and as well for the self-employed permit. So there are some specific requirements to obtain this, and this might be IT engineers from India, for instance. There might be healthcare workers. There are a lot of different types of work or types of occupation for people who apply for these permits. Finally, you have the seasonal workers as well, which are also quite numerous, but which is limited in time. So the essential for the self-employed, and that is why probably you're interested as well, this can be given for an unlimited period of time. It can be given for 1 year at a time, but it can be renewed. And once you've been in for 3 years with this permit, you might apply for a permanent residence permit. You can also, your family can also apply to live with you here in Norway. So this is the most important one for you, but it's not the most numerous. There are a few hundred applications a year, while there are several thousands on the other ones altogether, maybe up to 10,000 or something altogether. So, but it's still an important permit also for us, and I'll state some things about that shortly. But the most numerous ones are the ones that I mentioned there. Maybe the first one might be relevant for you. Just tell me if the mic is not close enough, because I know this is streamed as well, so you need to have a good, yeah. And also tell me if there's anything else. Yeah, thanks. So initially, I'll also state shortly, or maybe not so shortly, but kind of the main rules on how to apply. The main rule is that there are exceptions to that, but the main rule is that you need to apply from abroad, from your country of origin, from your country of citizenship, more precisely, or a country where you have lived legally the last 6 months. This might be clear for you, but if you are in that, if you are in that situation, you need to go to a VFS office, a Visa Facilitation Service office, which is clearly mentioned on our webpage as well, which then sends the application via a Norwegian or another foreign service mission to UDI. My eyes are not as good as they were. Maybe it's a sign of the age now, but so I need to put this a bit up front. Sorry for that. If you apply from Norway, you might do that if you are a skilled worker, if you have the sufficient education qualification. I'll come back to that. You need to stay here legally, and you cannot have applied for protection. Then you can apply from Norway. Obviously, you can also apply from Norway. I didn't mention here, but that might be relevant absolutely here. If you're in Norway already on another kind of permit, you can also apply then for a new permit if you stayed there the last 9 months. So I mentioned documentation. That is, oh my God, he mentioned documentation. That is kind of that is very practical. We have checklists on our webpage, which I would absolutely recommend any applicants to follow as well as they can, because we need that documentation. The case will flow much smoother, and it's more likely that you will get the correct answer when we make the first decision in the case. This is very practical, and it's clearly showed on our webpage, UDI.no. There are several links there, also on the first page. I received some questions also before I came here. I didn't mention that on the slide, but some asked, who do you meet when you call us? Who am I talking to? who are these persons? So the last, I say, 10 years, case processor, only case processors take the phone or answer the email when you meet the SIR, either by email or by phone. Only case processor. It's not the same one, and I know that many want to talk to the same person again. I understand that very well. I wish that myself when I contact a company or another office, but there are only case processors, and in the field that you are interested in. Someone also asked, who makes a decision in the case? How does this work? And we have waiting times, which I will comment also. Normally, one case processor deals or processes a case, and there is a waiting time. Not much happens always during the waiting time, unless we need to collect more information, which then make also the case to take a bit more time. But normally, only one case processor, at least in the field of work immigration, which I work on, will normally deal with the case. Obviously, we have cases when we have doubt, then we need to stop up, discuss with a colleague, or maybe somebody asks me, or asks there are several also leaders in the field, obviously, so it depends on the case. But most cases will be dealt by one case processor. I mentioned these 2 points because you asked about that, so I hope that is useful, might be useful to know. So we also have a waiting time, which is obviously a practical issue. So I also mentioned that here in this connection. Now that depends actually on the time if you met with the police or VFS before or after 1st of January. Why is that so? UDI changed the way we work, also partly the way we are organized on 1st of January. So the aim is to have more applicants to get their decision faster. But in the meantime, we work from also with old cases and also with new cases. So this means actually, if you applied for self-employed person permit before 1st of January, currently you need to wait for 7 months, and that is a lot. Usually it's been much less than that. Our aim is kind of 4 to 8 weeks. That has been more the normal, but it's been longer under the COVID period due to the other work tasks we needed to solve then. And we still need to lower this, but usually it's been 1 to 2 months. Now it's 7 months if you applied before the 1st of January, unfortunately, and 4 months if you applied after that. So the self-employed person permit, there are several requirements, and I go through those I think that are most relevant, and also mention what documents you need to hand in. 2 of the requirements are linked to what I mentioned already, the education and qualifications you have, and also that you have a sufficient business income. And it's worth to note that you need to have, as you might be aware of, that you need to have a sufficient business income from the very beginning. And this might be difficult for some companies, obviously. When you start up, it's not the time that it's most easy to have a profit. So there's been discussions about that, I'd say both internally at us, I know also at the lawmaker, the lawmaker here is the Ministry of Work and Social Inclusion. So that has been a topic the last years. I know some of you are aware of that as well. And I think that the previous government, they wanted maybe to have or they considered to have a kind of grinder permit, kind of more widely. Can we have the new Google, or maybe we wish to mention another company now, I don't know. Can we facilitate more to get kind of the entrepreneurs to Norway? The change, the provision or the residence permit, the rules were changed, but the impact is quite limited, as I will show you shortly. I mentioned here that the legal basis in the immigration regulations, section 618, and it's also based on section 25 of the Immigration Act. we have some guidelines, both from the Ministry of Labour and Social Inclusion. If some of you are interested, you can also, we will update our guidelines, UDI guidelines, quite soon. And then we'll also refer to them. But the guidelines from the Ministry of Labour and Social Inclusion is A4-2021, and it's regarding the implementation of changes to this provision. I don't think it's easy to find it just now, but hopefully it will be soon, because this came last year in connection with the change of the provision. Absolutely, and I'll be happy to share that with you, some of you if you're interested later on. I can also send that to Bianca. If, the guidelines from the Ministry of Labour and Social Inclusion, Arbeids- og inkluderingsdepartementet, that is A-4-2021, and in English, implementation of changes to section 618. It's not more than that. And also mention some from that guidelines in connection with business income. UDI guidelines is 2014-009. And this guideline will be probably updated quite shortly. We are in the process of doing that. So this is kind of maybe the introduction. I hope it wasn't too long for you, but the education and qualifications you need to have. This is the same with the skilled worker. If you're employed in Norway, you need to have completed either 3 years vocational education. Alternatively, you need to have completed an education or degree from a university or university college. So these are kind of the main roads. You need to have maybe the completed educational degree from a university is most relevant for you as in your field. But this is kind of the 2 education requirements you can alternatively meet to get this permit. So we have this special qualifications. That is kind of that might be relevant in a few cases, either if you don't have any education, or maybe more practical, that you have some education you haven't completed, and then you have some good work experience that you have a very good documentation of. Then that might be relevant for you. So when I meet people, either on phone or in person, that we finally can do now, is to underline that you need a very good documentation, especially on the special qualifications. So you need kind of a detailed documentation from previous employers with that is have a high quality. We need a lot of information about what you did, how long you did it, what qualifications you have. A lot of detailed information so that we can consider, is this as good as an education? It is a difficult assessment, so we need a lot of documentation to accept that. You also need that the work you're doing in your business must require such qualifications as I mentioned. I'm not going to go much back and forth, but I can also mention that there are a few rejections based on this requirement. So we see that, I'm not sure the reason why, but we have a higher degree of rejections on self-employed permit than the skilled worker, and there might be different reasons for that. But some people do not have the sufficient education and qualifications to meet to obtain a residence permit for self-employed persons. So then there's a requirement on independent business activity. Yes?
So I have a question in relation to the education part that you were talking about. How does UDI define skilled worker visa? How do you differentiate between skilled and unskilled work? And also, added question to that is, you were talking about special qualifications and how relevant and important it is for the visa. So in certain cases, the title of education differs from the working title of your work, where, I mean, you are working with similar strands and the scope of your work is broad. Then how does it work, and what do you need to present in order to avoid getting rejected?
Thank you so much for your question. I think that we see sometimes a lot of questions on that. It depends on the level of your education. If you have a vocational education, then it's not a stricter assessment, but you need to. If you're a carpenter, it's not easy to accept that you're going to do anything else than to be a carpenter. But if you have a higher education and an analytical education, you have some. Then we have we'll have more flexibility, I say, to accept that. We see that both where I work, but we see that on many employers that you need a higher education, but the persons working there might have quite a different background. So if you have a higher education, it's easier for us to accept that you're doing something that is not strictly into what you have been taught or what you have learned at the university or university college. But it is it's a discretionary assessment whether the work must require such qualifications, and sometimes that is a complex consideration. So sometimes people ask us, can I work as the following? Then maybe we cannot say absolutely that you cannot do it. And in this field, we don't have so many assessments from the court in Norway in the field of work immigration, but in this case, lagmannsretten, which I do not remember the English phrase on, but a court higher up in our system considered the case and stated that if you're working with tattoos, UDI cannot state absolutely that this is not possible. So that was a message to us. You cannot say this absolutely. So you need to have a concrete. You need to consider that in each case. You need so we do not have a full list, but we have kind of this is quite clear, and then we have the area of doubt.
Question. I mean, I guess it's just nicer that when you're on this slide, that we speak about it.
I think it's great.
It's just this understanding this idea of relevance. Like you like you're saying that with the higher education, the scope of the work might be larger. Now, when you consider self-employment, what is the relationship between the qualifications I might have and the self-employed, the sole proprietorship company that I form? Like, do you look for a kind of relevance, and what kind of direct connection do you look for that?
The consideration will be at least somewhat different than for the skilled worker when you are employed, because perhaps you know a lot more about this than I do, but if you're running an enkeltpersonforetak, a sole proprietorship, then you might need some other qualifications as well than only what you're going to actually produce or what service you are going to provide. So, but you would still need an education and or qualifications as defined in the rules that is relevant for what you're going to do. What you're going to do must require that you have such qualifications. But the consideration might be somewhat or at least slightly different than how we consider this when you are employed in Norway. I'm not sure if that's a great answer to your question, but I think that sometimes it's difficult to state this more concretely in general terms, but one can, of course, give examples. For me, it's great that you ask. So yeah. So I think that's interesting. Yeah. But I also have some slides, so or more information. I'm not a big fan of, or PowerPoint is a good tool, but sometimes it's kind of, oh, this is a PowerPoint. But as you see, I've not made many flashy PowerPoints. Maybe I should have put some symbols or some. I'll be better than that, but I think that I try to at least have a good dialogue or have a good interaction. I think that's much more important than what you show on the slides. That's my point of view. But this is for your thought. That's kind of the requirements on independent business activity. You need to have a long-term independent business activity in Norway. And what does that mean? We mean that the business must normally at least be your own sole proprietorship or enkeltpersonforetak. So, and you can only work in this business and you cannot take other work. So your business must normally be an enkeltpersonforetak. And we have some areas of doubt, but what is not an area of doubt is, to our opinion, if the business is a limited company, then it's not possible to obtain a self-employed person permit. Then you need to go for the skilled worker with an employer in Norway, which I will outline a bit at the end of the presentation. Yes?
Yeah, thank you. I wonder what are the limits, or if you can expand a bit more on this like long-term business activity and how that relates with the actual things that we can do. For example, in my case, I'm graduating from the university, and currently I have a student permit, and under that student permit, I'm not allowed to have any job that I cannot be self-employed. And I wonder what are the steps that I should take in order to create like business experience, or like, because my next visa would need to be like a self-employment visa, and to prove that one, I would need to have some history on that, and at the moment I'm not allowed. So I wonder what normally would be the criteria to evaluate this type of application. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. I think that is a question we also receive quite often, or sometimes, in your situation, that you're a student, you have plans to make a company, but it's how do you make the company and to go with the profit from the very beginning with no time to kind of build up the company. Maybe that is also a way to see your question, and I think that is maybe a smooth transition to my next point. So maybe that will answer it partly at least, and then I'll try to comment specifically as well. But we see that you must have a profit from the very beginning, and in your situation, if you're a student, you cannot start. But you can kind of have, if you have some connections, maybe you can enter agreements, but you cannot start to perform. So if you have if you have some persons that have belief in you, you can enter agreements, so you have them ready. If that is obviously easier to start up then, if you have them ready, so you can. But we get the question: how much can you do before you have the permit? You can enter agreements. You can also contact enhetsregisteret, or the register, to get the organization number. You can do some things, but you cannot do so much. So that might be challenging, because you need to have a profit or a business income of at least 265,998 per year pre-tax. So that might be it's a strict requirement, and it might be difficult for some to obtain that if you do not have kind of warmed up clients or something in that direction before you start up. Before I move on, I'm not sure if that's or at least partly an answer to your question. Yeah.
You say that a way to document that income or that activity from your business can be just like an agreement that hasn't started. Like, that a company sort of promise that will give me a job, or that we will have some type of relationship, if I understood.
Yes, and I can expand a bit about that also shortly, how you document this. But this is kind of this is the target. And then we have the change from September last year, that we may accept that funds or means from public subsidy schemes sorry about the wording, a small part of this amount. And this is kind of it's not the big grinder change, and this might have a limited effect, but we have a possibility to accept midler, means, or tilskudd, funds from public subsidy schemes offentlige tilskuddsordninger. I state that because I didn't find any official author or translation of this. So we may accept that. But the business income must always constitute the substantial part of the amount mentioned. So that means this change have an effect, but the effect is quite limited. So we have not published, we have not information about this on UDI.no, but we are in the process of changing the UDI guidelines about this, so that this will be reflected there. And this is, of course, reflected in the guidelines from the Ministry of Work and Social Inclusion, as I referred to earlier. Yes?
Just so, I mean, for a lot of us, like, Norwegian terms are new. What comes under a public subsidy scheme?
Thank you. It's stated public subsidy schemes in the provision, and it's stated in the guidelines that this can be from Innovation Norway. It can be from fylkeskommune, the county municipality, or other public institutions in Norway that gives financial support to companies. So that might be from Innovation Norway, not surprisingly, but also from fylkeskommunen or other public institutions that gives financial support to companies. So this is kind of a balancing. I can state, but just before that this might be viewed as balancing the need to facilitate work immigration on one hand, and to control the working immigration on the other hand. So this is kind of a change that how much it helps, it's yet to be seen. We have not seen any cases yet, no applications so far. I'm confident that some will come, and then we'll see what effect will this change have. Yes.
So, yeah, can I just ask you, when you talk about public subsidy schemes, does that include grants given to artists, like arbeidsstipend from Statens arbeidsstipend? Would you consider that a public subsidy? So
that's a grant or a stipend from Statens arbeidsstipend that you ask about. Yeah. I say thank you so much for asking that. I will bring that questions with us. I do not have a clear answer on that, unfortunately. The wording in the guidelines states that other public institutions in Norway. So if this is a public institutions in Norway, I'd say that we might absolutely accept it. But I cannot say that for sure. But thank you so much for asking it. And if you have any follow-up questions to that, you are very welcome to contact us. You can also refer to the fact that this came up in a setting here, that you can refer to my name so that it flows more easily in the system.
Just a short follow-up on substantial parts. Does the guidelines elaborate on that?
There's no elaboration on that. So it is kind of it's not stated on a percentage, so it's kind of it will be a discretionary consideration, obviously. And it might, it's not only the amount, I'd say that there might be other factors as well, but they are not outlined in the guidelines. So it's yet to be seen how we will consider that. So you have kind of the substantial part. It's very clearly stated in the guidelines, at least. And then we need to see how will this affect the applications. So sorry for not being able to give a clearer answer on that, but I think that this is what we have in the guidelines, and we have not seen any applications so far. But what I say is that at least the substantial amount indicates, obviously, that it's not easy to state that you need to have a lot of these other if you have a lot of support from public institutions, then we probably not accept that. You need to have the substantial or quite large part, but how large, that is yet to be seen. Thank you for the question. So that is the amount, but how can we consider that? We need some more information. We need kind of a business plan, or what we say, a detailed description of the business, and we need an assessment of the market and the sales potential of your service or your product. And we need to know the specific location, we need to know the name of the enterprise, but we also need a budget, kind of the income and expenses that you expect to have. And if the company is already established, we also need the accounts and bank statements for the bank accounts. So, but if it's a new company, we need kind of a business plan and we need a budget. But how can we consider this? Earlier we sent these cases to fylkeskommunen, the county municipality. Now we consider this ourselves. We have some experience to consider that. We need to look into which part of the labor market are you going into. But it might be a challenging assessment. So it is important that you have a budget, and if you have, and that you explain what are the background of the numbers in the budget. And as mentioned already, if you already have any agreements or any letters of intent with clients, you can put that as well, but that is not required.
Great.
Is that better? Oh, yeah, much better. So yeah, I was saying that thanks for being here. And I just wanted to take us like one step back when you are showing the number of, let's say like the income bar that UDI sets for as a business income. I was wondering what's the formula that you guys use to arrive to that number? What are the considerations you take to arrive there?
Thank you so much for your question. This is based on the last year, grunnbeløpet, or the basic amount at the Norwegian Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration. So it's based on grunnbeløpet there, and it's linked to, formally, it's also linked to the requirements of subsistence. And what on earth is that? That is the requirement that you have enough money to make a living in Norway. That's kind of the basic amount that we need. Unless you're going for family immigration, you need a bit more. But this is kind of the basic amount that you need, and it's almost the same as previously, but it increased a bit more when you changed the way of calculating it after instructions from the Ministry of Labour or instruction from the Ministry. So this is based on the basic amount, and it's 2.5 square the basic amount. So the basic amount is around 100,000, and it's 2.5 square to that, 2 ganger 5. So that's a calculation there. I can also see that now it's 11:30, so I think that I will soon come to the end of my presentation, but I also know that we have good timing to ask questions after that, or still while I'm talking here with the slides. If there are special reasons in your case, sometimes you need to be an employee as well. If you're a musician and you want to work for a TV company, maybe the TV company state that, well, this is great, but we need to employ you. And this is not allowed. What do you do then? You can apply. You can apply and get the permit covering also the right to be an employee in addition to being a self-employed person. But you need to note the same here as you need to have kind of the substantial part. The business income must always be the substantial part of this amount, this 265,998. So the substantial part must be from the business income must be the substantial part. So any other things like income or salary from an employer needs to come in addition. This cannot be kind of the basis of your enterprise. So that's quite practical. So we have the possibility also to special reasons or særlige grunner is a quite strong wording, but we have absolutely the possibility to give that if you have a good reason for this, but then you might need to demonstrate that you have a client that states that, well, you can do this, but we only do this, and we know that they only do this if you're an employee with them. Then we have the possibility to do that, and then we will state that in our decision as well. And this was a change some years ago, but it's been with us for 10 years or so. It's not new, but it was not a possibility before that. So if you have a limited company, then, or if you're employed in a limited company, then this might be an alternative to get a residence permit as a skilled worker with an employer in Norway. So the requirements to your education qualifications is identical to the one I outlined earlier, so I don't repeat that. And you also have the requirement of relevance. The job must require such qualifications. And some of the other requirements, these are not all. I mentioned the most practical ones. Also regarding the self-employed, there are a few other ones as well, but these kind of the main practical requirements for you. You need obviously an employer in Norway, and you need to have a concrete job offer. And please use our offer of employment form, because if you don't do that, we need to ask for it. And there are requirements that the pay and working conditions are cannot be poorer than what is normal in Norway or following the tariff. You need to have full-time work, and this is based on Section 6.1 of the immigration regulations. This is the most numerous. Here we have the most numerous applications and decisions in the field of work immigration. So a lot more than the self-employed, but that does not mean that the self-employed is not important, because it's an important provision. But we have, you need to demonstrate the education qualifications, and we have this target on sufficient business income, which might be difficult sometimes. But I think with these words, I'll say thank you so much so far.
Thank you so much, Vidar. I'll just hand it over to our chair for, do you want a seat or something? Not to put you on a hot spot, but...
I think it's great for me. If you're familiar with it, it's fine with me.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vidar, for presenting what is a relatively complex legal landscape for us. And I think there are many questions in the audience and perhaps even online. So we shouldn't perhaps take up too much time. But I think the important part here is, or one important part, these are very rule-bound considerations, right? Many rules working together to form the kind of general applicable legal scheme. So what I would perhaps challenge you a little bit on is if you could elaborate on to what extent is UDI in a position to look at the person, take discretionary decisions. To what extent are you only formally bound to apply the rules as they stand? To what extent can you take more personal considerations into account in your application of the different rules? For instance, when we talk about artists, they will normally have an expectation of progressive development over time. You start out slow, but you will develop a career, you will develop a market, you will expand your business, your income over time. To what extent will you even be allowed under current rules to take that kind of expectations for progressive development into consideration? is UDI allowed to do that? That is kind of an underlying question here. That you haven't really, you have mentioned discretionary decisions, but you could also expand a little bit on that. That perhaps you as a UDI worker would not be able or allowed to do what many applicants would encourage you to do, and perhaps elaborate a little bit on that, and what then is the justification for that, and what can we artists do to accommodate that. I would also encourage you to elaborate a little bit on a more specific legal rule, because you have touched upon it, and that concerns the possibility to take public subsidy schemes into account. You mentioned that public subsidy schemes can only be a small part. The rules, if I can find that, sorry. The regulation 618 states that the means from public subsidy schemes can be taken into consideration. Nothing there on small amount, etc. So where does that come from? It says that UDI can give closer guidelines, but where does that standard come from? Finally, before giving Diego also the possibility to ask some questions or comments, what precisely, and but this may be difficult to ask, but what precisely is the justification for allowing income from public subsidy schemes to be taken into consideration, but not private income from other sectors, which would be a very fairly general approach for these artists, that they have a small income from their main occupation, but they have other means to for income. So why only this allowance for public subsidy schemes and not for other income? Which there is probably a justification, but it's not immediately easy to see. As for many other rules, why do you need a sole proprietor business and not a limited company, for instance? Why isn't the reality of what the person is doing the main consideration? Why this formal, okay, you have the wrong organization for your work? There are justifications for this, but it's not immediately evident for everybody, perhaps. So just if you could elaborate a little bit on that. I think it boils down to what can you as UDI representative do, and to what extent are you bound by guidelines from persons above you. Well, I'll leave it at that and give Diego also.
Thank you.
Maybe, Vidar, would you like to answer first? Yeah. Then we go on?
I think that would be great to answer now, yeah, or to give our comments. Maybe I do not have a full answer on that, obviously, but thank you so much for the questions. I think that the first question, I could have mentioned more about that initially as well, because that is an important part of also our internal discussions. What do we do then? What do we do when you're kind of the first-time applicant? How nice can we be? We have the papers, we have the business plan, the budget is fine. For some, the budget is not fine. Then we cannot help you. But if you have a budget showing that you will have this number, but not all people have that. If the budget is not fine, then we cannot do anything. But I think that our discretionary consideration is whether is there a financial basis for your business activity. That is our consideration, or økonomisk grunnlag for driften. Do you have a financial basis, or is this financially viable, that your planned business? Is it or is it not? This is a difficult assessment, and I'll be honest with you to say that when we received the consideration from the assessments from fylkeskommunen, the county municipality, on this, they were not so substantial. and I can state this freely, this is also stated freely from us to the ministry, they didn't give so much, they didn't enlighten the cases so much. So we felt that we were at least as good as a county municipality to consider this. But how freely can we consider that? Because this is a rule bound. If you meet the target, you have the right to get the permit. But you need to meet the target, and that's a discretionary consideration. Is this financially viable? Do we believe, is it likely that your business income will be on that number? How much we can state kind of publicly? I would say that we cannot be in doubt. We must come to the conclusion that it's likely that you will reach this number. But on what basis are we considering that? I think that we have tried to be på giversiden. We have tried to be not nice, but we tried to see this in a positive view. So if you're an artist, it depends also on your CV. What have you done before? What are your potential? So we can definitely not operate freely, but there is I think it is a quite complex consideration to see, is it likely or is it not that you will reach this target? So this is something we have, but this is kind of the first time. Then you have kind of the chance to do this, and maybe you don't reach it after the first year as well. Then at least if we give a permit, we would be happy to receive a good explanation on why you didn't reach the target and what plans you have to reach the target the next year. I hope that are some reflections that connects to your question. Or question or comment, sorry. Well, the substantial part, that is not stated in the provision. This is, however, clearly stated in the guidelines from the Ministry of Labour and Social Inclusion. They state that if it's a fully clear guideline, you can ask about that, but they state that you can have financial support, as defined earlier, but always you need to have the substantial part, or the business income must always constitute the substantial part of the amount mentioned. So then you can also ask, and this is interesting, what importance, how much weight can you put into what is stated in the guidelines from the ministry, obviously. So this might be also not necessarily a legal issue, but it might be interesting to see if this interpretation, how strong is the fundamentation for that interpretation then? One way to say it. And then it's kind of the, we also feel that when we talk to entrepreneurs or self-employed persons, well, we have this residence permit for self-employed person, but how well does it work? Does it meet you at all? We are not sure about that. We see that there are only a few numbers here, only a few hundred, but there are many more self-employed. So I think that it's maybe the justification that it's, we had some hope that it would be broader. I'd say that maybe this could be more of a grinder permit. But it's kind of maybe balancing the need both for, we shall facilitate work immigration, but also need for control immigration to Norway. There are probably some links to that to state that your main purpose needs to be as a self-employed person. That the purpose, you get this permit to be a self-employed person, and then that is what you need to do. But this is quite stringent. Sorry, when it's a few years ago since I lived abroad, and I feel I need sometimes to find the word, but it's it's not easy to fit into all the categories we have. And we also see this in another issue related to skilled workers. Why on earth cannot they work for other employers if they meet the requirement of full-time work for one employer? And this might be not so clear following the wording as we thought. This might actually be an issue. the Immigration Appeals Board, they have some consideration on that. This is a question we work on. But all the time we see that, are the rules we have, are they well designed for the immigration to Norway? And this is also a role UDI have. We cannot change the rules, but we can propose, we can have communication with the Ministry of Labour and Social Inclusion. So maybe that's, but related to self-employed persons, I know there's been a lot of work before the change last year. So maybe it's not so easy to, or maybe you should not expect any much easier pathway the next year on this. But there's been a lot of consideration there. So that are some words. I think that might be related to the justification of this rule.
And then maybe if you don't mind, we just go a little bit over so we can get questions from the digital as well.
Yeah. So maybe take the questions first, and then I can conclude maybe.
Okay, great. Yeah, Bianca.
Hi. There are actually two questions, so maybe I just say the two of them and you can answer them as you wish. So the first one would be that I think, like, as artists, we are in a quite special category, that we are often, as self-employed, we are not just making a product to sell, but our work encompasses a lot of different activities, which are maybe also related to, like, social work, or, you know, working for other people, doing different kinds of activities. And then the question is, how do I prove that my experience and my background is of a good contribution that would give me the possibility to have a self-employed visa, which is like one of the only options that we have as artists in Norway, even if I don't sell to that amount that you mentioned. Is there any way? Is it really just about the money, or is there any other way to sort of show in our applications that what we are doing is valuable and that will bring will bring something back economically, maybe not in the first year, but in like 3, 4, 5 years, you know? So this is one. And then the other one from the audience is it possible to have a self-employed visa while studying, and are we obligated to reach an amount of income to be able to renew the permit and visa after the first year?
Thank you for these questions. I say that the short answer to your first, it's not all about the money, but you need to have that business income. That is a requirement. So it's not an easy response to your question, because kind of as a human, I state that, well, you do other things as well, which might be very valuable for the society. And I think that is something you're also, one of your topics on this seminar or immigration clinic after I read the program. So but kind of the answer would basically be that you need to reach this amount. At least you need to demonstrate that you think you're going to reach this amount. You need to have a budget that demonstrates that. You need to have information underpinning this. But then it's linked to the first question, then how can we use our discretionary consideration? How far can we go? At least we see that if people do not succeed the first year, we sometimes use some flexibility. I think I didn't plan to mention that, but I can mention shortly that also for a skilled worker starting in Norway, sometimes you don't start on the date of the application. You don't start with the date that your residence permit starts. Maybe there's a time lag for a reason. You haven't come to Norway yet or something like that. So if there's a similar consideration we've used for self-employed person, that, well, you didn't reach the target, but you almost did. maybe that was because you started a bit later than your permit started. That's a bit technical. So we have some flexibility there. I think there's a good reason for that, but the flexibility is not, it's not much flexibility there. And then excuse me, I would like, could you also repeat the second question? Sorry for that.
Yes, the second question from the audience was, is it possible to have a self-employed visa during studies? And am I obligated to reach an amount of income to be able to renew the permit and visa after?
So I think that I at least answered the second part of that question, but while you're a student, you cannot have a self-employed permit, a self-employed person permit at the same time. I'd say that would be the answer, because you need to have a purpose to be a full-time student, and you need to have the purpose to do long-term independent business activities. So I'd say that at least it would be a very small chance that we would grant such that we would approve such an application.
Hi. I was just wondering, you said at the start of your talk that the evaluation time was about 7 months. Is that correct? Yeah. What are the regulations for waiting for that time? Are you allowed to work, or do you have to leave the country, for example?
We get a lot of questions regarding the waiting time, because now it's unfortunately so long. At least before the COVID period, it used to be very often 4 to 8 weeks. Now it's 7 months if you are applied before 1st of January, 4 months if you applied after that. So in the meantime, if you already have a permit in Norway, if you apply 1 month before the expiration, you keep your rights. So if you're a student and do have a right to do part-time work, you can continue with that. But if you don't have a permit already, then it is technically possible for the police to give a permit while you wait. But for a self-employed person, I say that there's a very small chance to obtain that. So if you have a permit already in Norway, and that is renewable, if it's not renewable, for instance, as a job seeker, if you have a job seeker permit after your student permit, then this cannot be renewed. Then you cannot continue to work. But if you have a student permit, you can continue to work part-time and full-time in your vacations if you meet with the police 1 month before the expiration. So that is maybe the most practical right you have if you're here already. But if you're not in Norway already, then it's a limited possibility.
Well, I know that we're a little bit over time, probably, but Vidar, I was wondering, because as artists, and I think Kjetil said this before as well, like it's essential for us to have access to a patchwork economy. So the flexibility of how do you actually make an income, it's fundamental for the work of artists. And so in that respect, there is an exception that you could ask as a self-employed of to work up till 50% as an employee. So my question will be, and the thing is, like, there is a lot of things in life cannot be anticipated, right? So the system right now is very bureaucratic in the sense that you have to apply already 1 year in advance, knowing that you have access to that possible 50% position. But things don't work like that in reality, right? The moment of your application, when you are actually submitting your application, you might not have a contract at that point. So have UDI considered being more flexible about the timing where you can actually present this kind of exception that is not necessarily attached to the moment where you submit your original application? And I'm saying that because it is very much connected as well with time waiting. The waiting time, it usually, if we understand the art field, as a global way of like interconnected field, artists operate not only locally but also internationally. A lot of us are not able to leave the country to engage in income, art-related income activities. So that means that we are actually losing money, which prevent us from reaching that income bar that UDI is posing to us. So how do you understand those contradictions, and what do you feel can be done to debureaucraticize or like make it less bureaucratic for artists to access these kind of exceptions?
Thank you so much for your question there. I think that there are maybe two things I want to emphasize. One of them is that the rules are quite strict. So we have some area we can maneuver. We have some discretionary considerations, but the effects are limited as well. Because if you, for instance, if you're an artist, but you also have other incomes or incomes from other employers, that might be difficult to accept that, as we have outlined also earlier. But if you have the timing, you need to wait as well. You need to wait a lot. I think that for work immigration, and with a good reason, traditionally we have kind of waiting time for 4 to 8 weeks, and we need to have that 4 to 8 weeks, also in addition to the time you need to plan, meet with the police, the booking times in addition, is a lot. And 7 months, it's huge. It is embarrassing to talk about a 7 months waiting time, to my opinion. Maybe it's also very difficult if the waiting time is 3. But I think that if I understood your question correctly, if you have, you don't know what plans you have in 7 months, but if your plans change, or if you see that you want to apply now, but you're quite confident that you will be able to make an agreement or to receive a letter of intent in some months, then you are, of course, very welcome to submit that to us when the time for your application to be processed is coming closer. I'm not sure if that is an answer to part of your question, but these are some reflections at least.
Yeah, just briefly, there's been cases where artists have been told by a UDI representative that they have to reapply in order to submit this kind of exception. And let's say you submitted your application just a month before you get the possibility of asking for this kind of exception. So many of us have encountered that problem, and that represents like an economic burden for artists or for anyone that is reapplying for like a 2 months short period. You basically are talking about 15,000 Norwegian kroners just on visa fees, right? So that's part of the question.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, then persons have an application, it's being processed, it has not been processed by the UDI, but then you get the answer, you need to apply again. So I think that while you have the application, while it's being processed, if that's an application for self-employed persons, I'd say that with no doubt that you are welcome to send us an additional document. And if you have any troubles to do that, please contact us. You can refer to this as well, so we can look into it if you have received that message. If you have received that, I would be sorry for that. But I also bring that with me to mention that you have experienced that, and you shouldn't experience that, because if we have a case that is still, we have not processed it yet, then we should consider that. So I will also bring that with me. So thank you so much.
Hello, yeah. We're just going to wrap up now. Thank you so much, but I'll give Diego the last word, and yeah.
Yes, Vidar, thank you very much for your presentation, for your answers. I believe that you were able to clarify in a very effective way the most important aspects of these two permits, the skilled worker and the self-employed person. I would like to thank you also the public for the interesting questions, and I will not speak long because we are already out of time. I would just give a brief comment that I believe that through your presentation, your answers and the questions, we entered already into the core of the main goal and the main core of our seminar today, which is understanding, investigating this gap that exists between the rules, the law, the Vorschrift, and the guidelines of UDI, and what are the real possibilities for artists. So for example, I would like to point out when it comes for example, the skilled worker permit to reach this full-time requirement, or even the 80% possibility that it opens, as some artists from our public have also pointed out, the difficulty when it comes to the self-employed permit to reach the target income, which is, it seems to be high in certain situations. And these are material rules, right? So we're talking about what the law, the Vorschrift, and the guidelines require, so the material rules, the gap between material rules and real possibilities, but also the gap between the procedure, the process, so the timing and the problem that we just discussed right now, and the real life situation of artists applying. So I'm very glad that we already now kind of were able to shed some light on these issues. And I would just open food for thought here for everyone so that we can continue with our program, which is, we have discussed a lot, had questions, and also Vidar was very clear and complete answering about the income requirement and the target requirement, etc. But there is something that we didn't, someone asked, why do we have that? And we discussed about the 2.5 G, right? And how this is calculated. But it's also, probably we should investigate a little bit what is the ratio legis behind it. What is the reason why our legislator would require that? And I believe it's connected to the possibility of self-sustenance, that artists, people who come to Norway actually are able to provide for themselves. So this is an aspect that I would like to open also for our next points of discussion. And this, of course, opens welfare problems, right? So this is something we will discuss later in the program. So I am able to provide for myself because otherwise it would be a social rights problem and a welfare problem. And with these words, I conclude, and I thank you very much again, Vidar, and everyone for our participation.
Thank you, Vidar, so much for your presentation. And we're hoping that you are joining us for the latter part as well, and for lunch. So now we will welcome Ruben Steinem for the next part of the seminar. Ruben is currently the chair of board for NBK, and soon will be the director of OCA. So the floor is to you now. Yeah. Do you have the mic?